Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Astotara Satta Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sigaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bo. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. We continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, and today's text is verse 20. Bile bata rukrama vikramanye nashrin vata karna pute narasya jiva sati daru durikeva sutta na chopagatyat yurugaya gataha bile batorukrama vikramanye nashrin vatakarna pute narasya jiva sati daru durikeva sutta na chopa gatyat yurugaya gataha bile batorukrama vikramanye nashrin vatakarna pute narasya jiva sati durikeva sutta nacho pagatyat yurugaya gataha. Please chant.
Bile baturu krama vikramanye nasrinvata karna pute narasya jivasati daru duri keva sutta na chopagatyati urugaya gata.
Hare Krishna. Bilai abaturu grama vikramanye na shrinvata karna pute narasya jiva sati darduri keva sutta na chopa gayatya urugaya gataha. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Okay. Bile, snake holes. Bata, like. Urukrama, the Lord who acts marvelously. Vikraman, prowess. Yea, all these. Na, never. Shrinvataha, heard. Parnapute, the ear holes. Narasya, of the man. Jihva, tongue. Asati, useless. Dardorika, of the frogs. Eva, exactly like that. Sutta, O Sutta Goswami. Na, never. Cha, also. Upagayati, chants loudly. Urugaya, worth singing. Gataha, songs. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Translation. One who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the personality of Godhead, and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord, is considered to possess ear holes like the holes of snakes, and a tongue like the tongue of a frog. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Devotional service to the Lord is rendered by all limbs or parts of the body. It is the transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. Therefore, a devotee is engaged 100% in the service of the Lord. One can engage in devotional service when the senses of the body are purified in relation with the Lord, and one can render service to the Lord with help of all the senses. As such, the senses and the action of the senses are to be considered impure or materialistic as long as they are employed only in sense gratification. The purified senses are engaged not in sense gratification, but in the service of the Lord in toto, means completely. The Lord is the supreme with all senses, and the servitor, who is part and parcel of the Lord, also has the same senses. Service to the Lord is the completely purified use of the senses as described in the Bhagavad Gita. The Lord imparted instructions with full senses, and Arjuna received them with full senses. And thus, there was a perfect exchange of sensible and logical understanding between the master and the disciple. Spiritual understanding is nothing like an Spiritual understanding is nothing like an electrical charge from the master to the disciple, as foolishly claimed by some propaganda mongers. Everything is full of sense and logic, and the exchange of views between the master and disciple is possible only when the reception is submissive and real. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that one should receive the teaching of Lord Chaitanya with intellect and full senses so that one can logically understand the great mission. In the impure state of a living being, the various senses are fully engaged in mundane affairs. If the ear is not engaged in the service of the Lord by hearing about him from Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, certainly the holes of the ear will be filled with some rubbish. Therefore, the messages of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam should be preached all over the world very loudly. That is the duty of a pure devotee who has actually heard about them from the perfect sources. Many want to speak something to others, but because they are not trained to speak on the subject matter of Vedic wisdom, they are all speaking nonsense, and people are receiving them with no sense. There are hundreds and thousands of sources for distributing mundane news of the world and people of the world are also receiving it. Similarly, the people of the world should be taught to hear the transcendental topics of the Lord, and the devotee of the Lord must speak loudly so that they can hear. The frogs loudly croak, with the result that they invite the snakes to eat them. The human tongue is especially given for chanting the Vedic hymns and not for croaking like frogs. The word asati, used in this verse, is also significant. Asati means a woman who has become a prostitute. A prostitute has no reputation for good womanly qualities. Similarly, the tongue, which is given to the human being for chanting Vedic hymns, will be considered a prostitute when engaged in chanting some mundane nonsense. The translation again: one who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord, is to be considered to possess ear holes like the holes of snakes and a tongue like the tongue of a frog. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminati Namane Namaste Sarasvate Devi Gauravana Gacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatideshatarne Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. I lost my window. There it is. One moment. Okay. So, today's verse and today's purport, we're getting some instructions from Srila Prabhupada. We as practitioners of Krishna consciousness in his ISKCON movement, we are given some duties, each of us. And so specifically in this verse, our duties are to both use our ears properly and also to use our tongue properly. And then it gives an example of the improper use also of these things. And so first I want to address the verse itself. One who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the personality of Godhead, and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord, is considered to possess ear holes like the holes of a snake, and tongue like the tongue of a frog. So the ear holes like the holes of a snake, I'll talk about first, and then we'll talk about the tongue of the frog. Some people, when hearing this, it's not an analogy, a simile, about the ear holes like the holes of a snake. It's actually, a long time ago, it was assumed that snakes couldn't hear because they don't have ears. They don't have external ears. They also don't have most of the mid-ear, but they do have inner ears. So they certainly can hear, but in a very different way to humans. But since snakes don't have ears, external ears, early on, people thought that they actually couldn't hear. So actually one devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, or he was telling Srila Prabhupada, he said, Srila Prabhupada, snakes, they're deaf, they can't hear. And Srila Prabhupada said, who told you that? No, they can hear quite well. And later in this purport, we see that, of course, snakes can hear, because when the frogs are croaking loudly, the snakes can hear, oh, this is where the frogs are, and they go, and then, they get a nice snack. So this verse here, when it says ear holes like the holes of snakes, it's not referring to the snake's ears, it's referring to the holes that snakes occupy. So this story is told over and over, or this phenomenon is told over and over, of generally mice and other types of rodents, sometimes rats, also chipmunks, moles, things like that. They dig holes into the earth and they tunnel around, and they make basically tunnels and passages where they can live, store their food, etc. But when a snake comes to understand that, okay, here's this hole, and then so the snake crawls into the hole, and then it eats whatever's in there, the rodent who built the hole, etc. And so the reason why listening to something that's not directly or at least indirectly glorifying the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the reason why it's compared to that is the snake is something that's unwanted, right? The hole was built in the field by this mouse or this mole or whatever it was built by, chipmunk. And so the purpose of that is to serve the mouse, right? That's a shelter. But since something that was not authorized came in, the snake entered the hole, then it causes trouble, right? So in a similar way, our ears are meant to hear only Krishna Katha, right? And so if we allow anything else to enter, any mundane subject matter, it's very destructive to us, like a snake entering into that hole, and it just destroys everything that's inside. So this is what it means by ear holes, like the holes of snakes. So if we allow mundane topics to enter our ears, then it's like allowing the snake to enter into these holes in the field, and then they destroy what's inside. And then the tongue like a frog. So if we're not singing and chanting loudly the worthy songs about the Lord, then we are considered to have a tongue like the tongue of a frog. So Srila Prabhupada also explains that frogs, they tend to, especially at night, we can hear them. I actually can hear some now. They tend to want to make themselves known, to talk about whatever they have that they think is quite important. That's why they do it so loudly. And so they sit in the field, or it's usually near a body of water, and they make these loud noises. And the snakes hear that. So it's just inviting them to come. So in a similar way, when we repeat those things which are not authorized, these mundane things that we allow to enter the ear, so the serpents in both scenarios, when we allow these things to enter the ears, and we have nothing better to talk about, so we just talk about these same mundane things that we're hearing, it's like the croaking of a frog. It's only inviting death. It's not doing any good for the frog whatsoever. But he's very proud, right? And so he's making his noises, and then he's inviting death. So the lesson of this verse, of course, is that we have to be careful about what we hear and what we speak. And we are to be sure that what we're hearing and what we're speaking is bona fide, transcendental, not mundane, not going to bind us to this material world. So this, of course, reminds us of a couple of verses from the first canto, the 5th chapter, verses 10 and 11. Verse 10 is Naya vachaschitra padam harer yaso jagat pavitram pragranita karhichit tadvayasam tirtam ushanti manasa nayantra hangsa niramant yushikshaya. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole world, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows, since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode. They do not derive any pleasure there, right? So if the words are describing the glories of the Lord, then the saintly persons will hear. If they are not, then it's considered to be like a place of pilgrimage for crows, right? the devotees are meant to be swan-like. We see that crows, they generally gather around like rubbish bins and rotting flesh and things like that, and that's where they relish. That's where they get their, their desires fulfilled. Whereas the swans, they prefer to swim in a very clear reservoirs of water with nice lotus flowers and stems that they can, swim between. And so in a similar way, the saintly persons, when it comes to hearing, they only want to hear, they're only attracted to words that describe the glories of the Lord, right? Then the next verse, 1:5:11, Tadvag visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pratishlokam abadadhavyapi namanyanantasya yason kintaniyat shrinvanti gayanti grananti sadhava. On the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc. of the unlimited Supreme Lord is of a different creation, full of transcendental words, directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest, right? So we see the difference here. Now, when we're talking about literature that's giving full descriptions of Krishna, of his name, his forms, his pastimes, then that's a different thing. That's not like a place of pilgrimage of crows. This is directed toward bringing a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization, right? So when we talk about mundane literatures, they're actually contributing more to this world's misdirected civilization. It's even misdirecting us even further from actually where we want to be. But that literature which glorifies the Supreme Lord, when we understand that, when we hear that literature, when we understand it, then we are able to redirect our consciousness to properly become eligible to engage in Krishna's service, right? So such transcendental literatures, even if they're imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Those are two main verses that also apply to today's verse. There are a few other ones that I want to bring up, because this topic, and it's important why we understand this topic comes up again and again throughout all of our shastras. It's very important for us to understand how to properly use, in today's verses context, how to properly use our ears and our tongue. Generally, we tend to, basically whatever we're attracted to, whatever we consider part of our world, whatever lies within our paradigm, those things we will listen to. So if you're a sports fan, you're going to not only watch the sports, but you're also going to listen to talk shows who, talk about sports and the players' statistics and et cetera, like that. So the things that we're attracted to, we're going to listen to, right? And we're also going to speak about them, whatever we're attracted to. And so Krishna constantly points out through the various shastras and also saintly persons that when we do that, we have to be very careful, because one goal is attained by cultivating actual knowledge. This is also given in the Shriyas Upanishad. And then a different result is attained by cultivating nescience. So we have to understand the difference between the two so that we can actually get a favorable outcome, right? Because we don't want to be stuck here in this material world. We understand that it's a miserable place, and we're trying our best to try to make it at least comfortable for us, right? But the idea is, if we truly know our actual position as spirit, soul, infinitesimal part of the Supreme, we understand our relationship between ourselves and the Supreme Lord, then we won't actually be attracted to these mundane things anymore, because we'll have our priorities in order. We'll only want to hear transcendental messages of the Lord, and we'll only want to repeat those transcendental messages. We won't be hearing and repeating about the affairs of the mundane world, whether it's sports or politics or anything like that. And so a few more verses I want to read along these lines, and then we'll go over again the importance of it. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 13. For one who is anxious to engage constantly in hearing such topics, Krishna Katha gradually increases his indifference toward all other things, right? So not only is choosing the correct source, Krishna Katha, going to help us in our own spiritual advancement, it's also going to help us to overcome our desires to hear from anything else. So it's not only helping us in our spirituality, but it's also helping us get rid of those things, those anarthas that we're already spontaneously attracted to. Right. Continuing the verse. Such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna by the devotee who has achieved transcendental bliss vanquishes all his miseries without delay. So nobody wants to be miserable in this material world, and we're trying our best, by material means to overcome this misery, to counteract this misery. But actually, the devotee understands that this misery can only be counteracted by a spiritual solution. So when we engage in constantly hearing topics of Krishna, this Krishna Katha, then gradually we will become indifferent to those other things because they pale in comparison, right? Krishna consciousness is a higher taste. So naturally, if we hear these topics and relish them, then our taste for these other pale things then diminishes, right? And we're able to vanquish all of these miseries. Then in Canto 4, Chapter 7, Text 44, these are the Vidyadharas, and they're praying, Dear Lord, this human form of body is meant for attaining the highest perfectional objective. But impelled by your external energy, the living entity misidentifies himself with the body and with the material energy, and therefore, influenced by Maya, he wants to become happy by material enjoyment. He is misled and always attracted by temporary illusory happiness. But your transcendental activities are so powerful that if one engages in the hearing and chanting of such topics, he can be delivered from illusion. So again, this verse is showing not only the importance of proper hearing and chanting, but the potency of it as well. So not only is it important to do, but it's also quite powerful. Then in the 5th canto, chapter 12, verse 13, who are the pure devotees mentioned here? In an assembly of pure devotees, there is no question of discussing material subjects like politics and sociology. In an assembly of pure devotees, there is discussion only of the qualities, forms, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is praised and worshipped with full attention in the association of pure devotees. By constantly hearing such topics respectfully, even a person who wants to merge into the existence of the absolute truth abandons this idea and gradually becomes attached to the service of Vasudeva. So even the offenders, the Mayavadis who want to merge into the existence of the Supreme, even they become benefited. That's the power of hearing and chanting in an assembly of devotees. That these impersonal notions just disappear and we gradually become attached to service of Krishna. Then in the 10th canto, there's a lot of these quotes, and they're all really great. So I couldn't narrow it down to only reading one or two. But the whole point of today's verse is that when we hear these verses over and over, not only do they purify us and help us get closer to Krishna, but they help us to lose our taste in the pale subject matters. So Canto 10, Chapter 1, verse 16. The Ganga, emanating from the toe of Lord Vishnu, purifies the three worlds, the upper, middle, and lower planetary systems. Similarly, when one asks questions about the pastimes and characteristics of Lord Vasudeva Krishna, three varieties of men are purified: the speaker or preacher, he who inquires, and the people in general who listen. Right? So just as the Ganga is purifying the three worlds, hearing Krishna Katha is purifying three varieties of men: the speaker, the person who is inquiring, and then anyone who's within earshot, anyone who's listening. Then also in the 10th canto, chapter 52, verse 20, what experienced listener, O Brahmana, could ever grow satiated while listening to the pious, charming, and ever-fresh topics of Lord Krishna, which cleanse away the world's contamination? Again, showing how not only is it, since it's spiritual, it's directly Krishna, that we don't grow satiated when hearing about it, but it cleanses away the world's contamination. Again, back to the verse from 1:5:11. Bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of the misdirected civilization. Right. So cleanse away the world's contamination. All of the sufferings can be alleviated just by this, by diverting our hearing and our repeating, and redirecting it to Krishna, topics of Krishna instead of topics of, as it said before, social or political topics. Then in chapter 80 of the 10th canto, verse 2, O Brahmana, how could anyone who knows the essence of life and is disgusted with endeavoring for sense gratification give up the transcendental topics of Lord Uttama Shloka after hearing them repeatedly? And I mentioned before in the Upanishad that mantras 10 and 13 actually echo the same point. Mantra 10 is, the wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. So culture of knowledge means topics of Krishna. Culture of nescience means knowledge of mundane, temporary, material topics, whether it be political, social, etc. And then mantra 13 of Sri Upanishad, again, echoing the same idea. It is said that one result is obtained by worshiping the supreme cause of all causes, and that another result is obtained by worshiping that which is not supreme. So really, you only have two choices. Either you're going to worship Krishna or you're going to be worshiping material nature. We don't have a third option. All this is heard from the undisturbed authorities who clearly explained it. So this is coming from authority. This isn't a speculation or conjecture. And then the last verse that I will, actually I have a couple more. This is one that I quote often. This is a very important verse. Srila Rupa Goswami gives in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidim Vina Aikanta Ki Harer Bhaktir Utpata Yaiva Kalpate. So Srila Rupa Goswami is saying that devotional service of the Lord that ignores the authorized Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, Narada Pancharatra, pardon me, is simply an unnecessary disturbance in society. So this is talking about devotional service if it's ignoring the authorized Vedic literatures. What to speak of any other activity? Basically, it's saying anything that is not, that is ignoring the authorized Vedic literatures or literatures in pursuance of the Vedic version. If it's ignoring that, it's just going to cause a disturbance. There's no possibility. The snake is entering that hole and it's going to destroy it. So if we're hearing or repeating anything mundane, then it just destroys everything. The ear is meant to hear about Krishna. The tongue is meant to speak about Krishna. If the ear doesn't hear about Krishna, it's going to hear about other things and it becomes spoiled. If the mouth isn't talking about Krishna, it's going to be talking about other things and it becomes spoiled. Both are inviting death. And then I just want to mention a verse that was just covered a few days ago. This is very important. 2:3:17. Both by rising and setting, the sun decreases the duration of life of everyone, except one who utilizes the time discussing topics of the all-good personality of Godhead. Right? So time is there, and it's shortening our lifespans, and time is meant to remind us, to keep us encouraged, to keep us motivated and sincere that we shouldn't be wasting time, because time is very valuable. You can't get back a moment of it. So any moment that our ears are not hearing Krishna Katha, and any moment that our tongues are not repeating that Krishna Katha that we heard from the authorized sources, is actually a waste of time. The reason it's repeated over and over and over again throughout the Shastras is because it is very important. It is the important thing. Because we spirit souls, we're eternal, we're here in this material world, and we don't belong here. And the only way to get out is to redirect our consciousness from material to spiritual, from self-centric to God-centric, right? And the way to do that is to hear topics of the Supreme Lord from an authorized representative, and then to repeat them in the same way. It's called, we're meant to be representatives, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out at the end. Let's see, let me get that back up. Oh, that's the wrong one. In the impure state of a living being, the various senses are fully engaged in mundane affairs. If the ear is not engaged in the service of the Lord by hearing about him from Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, certainly the holes of the ear will be filled with some rubbish, right? Because we're going to be listening to something. Therefore, the messages of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam should be preached all over the world very loudly. So then this is the duty that we're given, not only to hear properly, but also to repeat it so that others can also benefit from this. It's called being a representative, right? We are meant to be Krishna's representatives, Srila Prabhupada's representatives. And the word representative in itself, it means to represent. So it means that first it has to be presented to us in an authorized way. That's the hearing. And then it has to be represented purely, without any adulterations through our tongue. There are a couple more things that I want to read. These are coming from Sri Tattva Sutra. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote a thematic study of the Shriyas Upanishad. So it just means that, and he does this often. He did this with a lot of different books, where he takes a work and then he explains them according to Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. And so he'll take the verses and put them essentially in a different order to show, through the proper understanding of the knowledge of the relationship between the living entities, the material world, and the Supreme Lord, the means by which to escape this material world and to attain the ultimate goal of love of Godhead. And so in this Sri Tattva Sutra, in Sutra 17, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, love for the Supreme is natural, spiritual, and brings the highest bliss. Love for what is not the Supreme is artificial, material, and brings only sufferings, right? So in the context of today's verse, if we're hearing about Krishna, then it's going to bring the highest bliss. But if we're hearing about anything that's not the Supreme, that's artificial and material, it's only going to bring suffering, right? Then in Sutra 18, he continues, afflictions of the jivas arise only due to their secondary affinity to the world, right? So all of these the different sufferings that we're undergoing are all because we have a secondary affinity to the material world, right? And then continuing Sutra 19, because it restores the soul to its original nature, renunciation of materialism brings liberation. right? So if we give up our tendency to hear and repeat mundane things, then that will bring about liberation. And it's also stated in the verses that we've quoted earlier that just by reading these topics of the Supreme Lord, not only is it elevating our consciousness spiritually, but it's also helping us to become detached from those other things, because we see that there's actually not substance there. It's a shadow, right? The real substance is in spirituality. So it's always in our best interest to pay close attention and to assess what it is we value, what it is we spend our time and energy listening to, and then obviously then what we are repeating. So we can learn a lot from these verses. Not only is it beneficial for us individually, but also it's beneficial for the world collectively. And that's what Srila Prabhupada wanted of his disciples. He wanted us to become proper examples and to help others out, right? He wanted to help out the world, and so he wants his disciples to also help out. And this is the way we do it. First, we hear from an authorized source, and then we repeat it in an unadulterated way, and then we can help ourselves and others at the same time. So I will stop the class here and see if there are any questions or comments or topics of discussion. Anyone?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
A couple of things that I was reflecting on is when you said, these topics are constantly repeated. I've heard people say, what is this for? All the time it is Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. That's all you keep saying, And like you said, it's because it is important and it has to be repeated, and so that it sinks in. So that was one thing. And the way you explained representative, it has to be presented to you, and that's an explanation of parampara. My difficulty always has been in that idea of giving this to others, also helping others, understand what is important. That part doesn't seem to come to me. I don't seem to feel that I want to help myself, and I want. I think that difficulty is because of all the stuff that is happening in the world. I think I'm using that as my excuse, I guess. All the fighting that happens in the world is because of religion, and I think I get a little scared that that's how it will be seen.
Right. That's a fair assessment. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, because so it has become quite popular these days. People are using this term, I think it's called SBNR, spiritual but not religious. Because in so many religions, there has been corruptness and exploitation and things like that. And there have been so many wars that are started because of religion. But it's mostly the hypocrisy why people don't appreciate religion these days. And so the best preaching, I find, is just example, right? If we live the Bhagavat lifestyle, then people automatically are attracted. They understand that you're doing something right. You don't have to sit everyone that you know down and read to them Shastra. But if you convey the message of Shastra in everything you say, then that's a very good start. And if you imbibe the principles of Shastra and act accordingly, that's also a very good start. So preaching isn't always, hey, let me tell you about, Lord Krishna, the blue cowherd boy that, wears a peacock feather and yellow garments and has makara earrings that swing to and fro, etc. That's not always what it is. Sometimes that's what it is. But it's about the principles that we understand from Shastra. It's about understanding, and every philosophy understands this point, that God is the supreme, and we are limited, right? And so we have to break this tendency of seeing the world in a selfish way, right? So even when I was young, I was raised a Lutheran, which is like a branch of the Catholic Church. And so we went through catechism. So basically when you're 12, 13, you go through a Bible study course, and then you take some sort of test to show that, okay, you at least understand the Bible to some extent. And then it's almost like initiation, but not really. You get a confirmed name, and then afterwards you're allowed to take communion, the body and blood of Christ. So when I was taking this Bible study course when I was 12, we had a guest speaker come in, a vicar from another church, and she was giving the class. And so she asked us, what does it mean to sin? I think most of you heard me tell the story already. She said, what does it mean to sin? And all of the students, we started giving basically examples, like to do something bad or to do something wrong or to do something evil, like that. And she said, well, these are examples of sin, but I want like a concrete definition. What does it mean to sin? And we just kept basically repeating the same things: to do something wrong, to do something bad, to do something evil. And so she wrote on the chalkboard a very small S, a huge capital I, and then a small N. And she said, to sin is to put yourself before God, to think I this, I that, I the other thing. What do I want? What do I need? To see the world from only our perspective, right? To put ourselves before God. And this is the Isavasya principle that's given in Shriyas Upanishad right off the bat. Everything belongs to Krishna. Your quota is there. If you take anything beyond that, you're a thief, right? If you're considering something to be yours, you're a thief because it belongs to Krishna, right? Everything belongs to God. So my point is that the principle is there in every philosophy, that everything belongs to God. And if you're just trying to use it in your own way, you're exploiting, then that's sin, right? Or you give it a different word depending on what context you're going. So if we just preach this by our behavior and our words, that we have to stop being selfish and we have to understand where everything's coming from. It's just raising the level of consciousness, because first we're on anamoy, right? Anamoy means we're just trying to survive, right? We're just looking for our next meal. And it's very self-centric, and it's a tight self-centric, it's just basic survival. Beyond that, there's pranamoy, which is then you start understanding that there are other people that exist, and you should also take into consideration their problems as well. So I'm hungry, so I want to eat something, but I shouldn't take it from somebody who's also hungry and trying to eat, right? So then you have this philosophy of, as long as you're not hurting anybody, you do what you want. That's pranamoy, right? We don't want to stop people there. We want to get people even further. So then Gyanamoy is doing the right thing according to a superior authority. So there has to be some Shastra involved, because there's a natural law. We just have to understand what it is, right? So we lose a lot of people at this point because they don't want to accept that any sort of Shastra. However, they will accept the higher law of the government or their teachers in school, etc., right? So that's an issue too. If that's the level they're on, then our preaching becomes how to truly understand what is an actual authority and what's not, right? And then we can point out that, these so-called scientists, they change their perception, or even social situations, right? Social perception is always changing, which means it's not concrete. It's not definitive, right? And so if it's always changing, how can you count on it? You just keep changing. What I'm doing that now, that's right. If I did it before, it would have been completely wrong. And what I did before that was absolutely right. Now it's considered completely wrong. And since I've done that, now I shouldn't do anything else ever again, right? All of these things, it doesn't actually lead to a productive society, right? But if we are able to accept Shabda, accept the proof of knowledge coming from above, then we're in much better shape. Then our consciousness can raise even more. And then, it only goes up from there. So depending on what level people are at, we might just be preaching to bring them from the Anamoy to the Pranamoy platform. And that's at least a good start, right? And we could do that through our behavior or through speaking. But essentially, when it comes to preaching to others, it means, for the most part, unless you're a preacher whose understood duty is I go out and I just preach to everyone I meet. If we're just an aspiring devotee, then we preach by our example. But then anytime it's our duty to understand where someone's coming from, right? If you don't know where someone's coming from, you can't give them directions. So if we understand what their level of consciousness is, then we can preach accordingly. Some people, the only preaching we can do is giving them some nice Mahaprasadam from the temple, right? And so we have to be able to determine what can work. We don't want to disturb anyone's mind, make them unfavorable, things like that. So we have to use our intelligence. But yeah, the more we hear, the more we actually use our ears for its intended purpose, not to allow the snakes to come in and destroy everything, but to allow the Vedic knowledge to come in and understand, the better we are suited to then be able to properly preach through example and through discussion, if that makes sense. Did that address your question, Mata?
Yes.
To some
Yes,
extent?
it did.
Good.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? Looks like not.
I don't see any other hands up.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Hare Krishna.
Sure. Hare Krishna. Is that Bob?
It is Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you. Thank you for taking my question. So today we spoke about, we always want to hear Krishna Katha. We always want to be talking about Krishna Katha. But living in the mundane world, it doesn't always seem possible to do that. I'm kind of piggybacking off of what Mother Chibarati said. Like, I go over and visit my parents. My dad's going to want to talk to me about the Eagles game that was Sunday, or
Right.
what's going on with your life, what's going on with work, And
Sure.
I always feel, if I'm like, hey, we can't ever talk about anything like that. We just have to talk about Krishna.
Yeah.
People are going to think I'm in some sort of crazy cult. You know what I mean? They're going to be saying,
Sure.
what's wrong with you? How do we wrestle that? I have coworkers. There'll be little mundane things that we talk about. So again, how do we go about that, not living in an ashram, living in a householder's life?
Yeah. So we have to find a balance. And sometimes that's a hard thing to do, because a lot of times we think it should be all or nothing, right? Like you mentioned, one option is to say, no, Dad, I can't talk to you about the Eagles game or this or that. We can only talk about Krishna, right? And then the other extreme is, you just totally jump right back into your old life and you would completely ignore. So the balance is that you have to maintain the relationship. He's your father, so he's going to talk to you about the Eagles game, and you can talk about that sort of thing. But somehow also either, like I was mentioning, through your behavior, or even through topics of discussion, or mentioning something that you've read. There's different ways to do it. So when I was working in a tourist attraction town. I had many coworkers, and they all knew that I was a Hare Krishna devotee, aspiring. And so they knew, what kind of stuff I ate, what kind of stuff I didn't, all of these, they knew all of these things about me. And I didn't have to preach directly to them. My first year that I was there, after only knowing them for just a few weeks, I found out that, it's Pandav Nirjala Ekadasi, I found out. And I said, oh, and I found out the night before, like almost at midnight. And I said, oh man, I'm fasting tomorrow. And they said, oh, what for? And so I told them, I said, it's a special Ekadashi where, it basically, if you've messed up any other ones, it sort of makes up for them. And so you don't eat anything, you don't drink anything like that. And they said, oh, well, we'll do it with you, and they did, so they both followed Nirjala Ekadasi on a very auspicious day, just because they respected me as a person, and they didn't want me to be doing it alone. I didn't mind doing it alone, but like that. So these things will tend to just happen. And another one of those artists that I was working with, he started drawing pictures of Krishna because he knew I liked Krishna, right? And so these things naturally just occur. And then another one of the artists I work with, he's from Hungary. When I went to visit him in Hungary, he took me to Krishna Valley, the farm in Hungary. So sometimes it's just little things like that when the relationship is strong, then automatically they want to know what's important to you, right? So if your dad knows that this is important to you, he'll at least want to know a little bit about it. I was just talking to someone recently. It's actually the cousin of one of the artists that I used to work with. She now became a devotee. She's living out west. And so she contacted me to let me know, hey, remember when you used to tell me about Krishna? And then, well, now, 20 or so years later, now I joined the ashram. So she was saying that her husband, who's not a devotee, he sees that she's offering all of her food to Krishna. She's got a little Gopal deity. And so he sees that has value to her. So then when he makes food, he says, should I offer this also to Krishna? And even sometimes it's meat. And she says, oh, no, he won't eat that. But it's the thing. If there's a relationship, there's going to be a natural desire to reciprocate with that other person. So just as you're reciprocating your dad's love of the Eagles, right? Then, if the relationship is strong, he'll also appreciate that, your character and behavior has also evolved, and even if it's just little things. So we have to find the balance where we're not driving our friends and family away unless they're totally, detrimental to our devotionals. There are circumstances where we have close friends or relatives that are just really bad, and so we have to limit our time to as little as possible. But anyway, we have to figure out what that balance is, and the more we understand Shastra, the better we're equipped to actually handle that situation properly and find that balance. Is that acceptable, Bob?
No, that's great, because that's kind of where I am in my life. I wanted to make sure I was kind of, doing the right thing. My wife will ask me, should I offer this? Do we offer that first? And my mom and dad will ask, I'm going to make you this. What can I put in it again? So
exactly. So it's already happening. It's already happening, and it's happening subtly and organically.
Yes. And I feel like sometimes when I hear that, it's extremes, it's all or nothing. So I kind of wanted to ask that. That question.
I also have neighbors in Kentucky. They're Baptists. Which means basically most Christians, if you believe in someone that's not Jesus, usually they, kick you to the curb, right? But they understand where I'm coming from. We respect each other, and they actually cook Vedic when I'm there. Well, I visit them, and they want to cook, something that I can eat. So they don't put onions or garlic in either, right? And I didn't even ask that. Normally, if someone offers me, I'm like, oh no, it's okay. I'm fine. I don't need to eat anything. I'm fine. No, we want to know. And then so they got, they understood the whole thing, and so they cook like that when I'm there. So these things just happen naturally, organically. And when we see these things happening naturally and organically, we know that that's actually a good relationship because it's based on, your values. And I also respect theirs. So like they invited me to go to their church, for example. So I went and I'd listen to their Bible class and the sermon, and I had really nice conversations with both the leader of the Bible class and the minister, because our philosophies are completely parallel. Whatever they're giving a sermon on, there is that same thing presented in our Shastra. It's, of course, much more elaborate in our Shastra, but we don't need to point that out. We could just say, oh, that's also here. Then we have this mutual respect for one another, right? Like, for example, one of the Bible study classes that was going on was talking about how, I don't remember the names, there was some fellow who he had this kingdom that God gave him, and then he took a what do they call it, a census, but God didn't ask him to take a census, so he ended up losing everything. The kingdom was then taken away from him. It's because he was considering it his own. He was counting because he thought, this is my kingdom, right? And because he did that without actually, God didn't tell him to count. If God told him to count, yeah, then you count. But otherwise, if you're counting for yourself, then you think you're in control of it. And as soon as you think you're in control, you don't understand spirituality. So I brought that up, and the minister said, yeah, that's exactly right. Because the leader of the Bible study wasn't sure how to answer that. He was like, I don't know. He just took a census and God didn't tell him to. So, but that was the idea, is because he actually, he was acting self-centrically instead of God-centrically, right? So it's not that taking census is against godliness. It's, if you're doing it for yourself, it's for you. If you're doing it for God, then it's for him, right? So these things, we can appreciate across these so-called divides that we have. And we see that when it's an actual good relationship, then there will be some, mutual exchanges of respect. But it can be difficult. So it sounds like you're on the right track if they're asking you what they can cook for you and things like that, and they actually care. So they, they appreciate it, right?
Yes, thank you.
So it's good. Okay. Anything else? Okay. That looks like it's all. Oh, today is also Ram Vijayotava. I see that you guys celebrated that on Sunday, but it's worth mentioning that that's today, where Lord Ramachandra gained victory over Ravana. And I think it's also the appearance day of Srila Madhvacharya. He's the head of our Sampradaya. Of course, Lord Brahma's the head, but then in more recent years, the four Sampradayas have four different representatives. So Madhva Acharya is our Sampradaya Acharya. So, okay, we'll end here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you all for attending. Vanchakalpatribhyaścha Kripasindubhyeva Pratibham Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.